at the church. I should have been. Here you will see on the left of the path to Thurroton the site of the original manor house. This field was originally called Brewster's. All the fields had names. Only a little is known about the manor house and the domain, a piece of land attached to a manor and retained by the owners for their use. You may also see some small rocks on the right of the path, which were parts of the original manor house. This is where the lord of the manor lived, or rather stayed, when he visited the village. The lord of the manor owned many other manors and lived elsewhere, no doubt more prestigious and palatial. Belvoir Castle, Thoresby Hall and Pierpont Hall, for example. The manor house was therefore usually let to a wealthy farmer. Tradition says that the manor house was built on the site of a castle. In 1952, a tractor was ploughing Brewster's field for only the fourth time in living memory. A treasure trove of 1,413 coins was discovered. There was no trace of a container. The coins simply lay in a heap, suggesting they had been buried in a sack or wrapped in a cloak. It is thought they were buried at the time of the Civil War, 1642 to 1651, and were a local Roundhead sympathisers' family savings. While we're here, look across the fields to the hill and for the highest point there. This would be where the village mill stood. It is no longer standing there, as it was transported brick by brick to Auckland in New Zealand, where it stood until around 2000. We now walk back into the village down High Street. We pass a stone wall. There are other buildings throughout the village, partially in stone. These may well have come from the manor house when it was demolished. We turn left near the bottom of High Street along Lord Street. There are various old houses dating from the 19th century. These would have been built on the site of earlier houses. Unlike a church, houses were not built to last. One of these, on the left-hand side, is Churchside Farm. It was originally the pub, the Durham Ox. When it closed, the other pub, the Royal Oak, changed its name to the Durham Ox. The digging for gypsum in Austin dates back to medieval times. Austin may have been a supplier to the famous medieval alabaster carvers of Nottingham and used for some of the effigies in Bottisford Church. Casual digging of gypsum around Austin ceased around 1860, when an integrated business comprising both a quarry and works were constructed. These were at Mulhouse and adjacent buildings on the right-hand side of Loughborough, and called the Royal Plasterworks because the owner of the land also owned the Royal Oak. The quarry pit still exists behind these houses, together with the original buildings and ovens. These were used for converting the gypsum into plaster of Paris. In 1864, the Royal Plasterworks failed and a new quarry and manufactory were set up on the land just outside the village near the new railway line, in part of what is now the Girl Guide camp. We will visit it later. We turn left at the end of Loughborough and then first right along the road out of Austin towards Alverton. The site of the original spa has been rediscovered and is on the right on the bend along Spa Lane on the road to Kilvington. It was mentioned in the 1769 description of England. This says, "At Austin is a mineral water which, as it rises out of the spring, has a sweet chalybeate and a little rubbish taste, but when it has stood for some time, it becomes harsh. With the addition of a little predominating salt of a calcareous nitre, it will purge those of a gross habit of body, and turn the throat and tongue of its drinker perfectly black. It is good in the hypochondriac, melancholy, scurvy, want of appetite, costiveness, stoppage of the urine, obstruction of the bowels, ulcers in the lungs, indigestion, pain in the stomach, and to aid the vaporous debility of ladies." The opening up of the countryside by the railways in the mid-19th century persuaded many villagers with railway access to attempt to promote their spas to encourage visitors. However, there is no evidence to suggest that it was either famous or popular here. It is necessary to return to the village down Spa Lane. We turn left and follow the road to the junction. This area is called Lordship because it was owned by the Lord of the Manor. This is Manor Farm. It was probably built and located here when the manor house was demolished. No doubt it was built to tower over the parish, demonstrating the status and continuity of the Lord of the Manor. This is about all we will see of Upper Austin, as most are new buildings here. These all have wonderful views of Austin across the Smythe Valley. There were no buildings here until the early 20th century other than Manor Farm. A little way along Elton Road towards Elton is what was a coal mill, which has been converted into apartments. Next to it is an impressive larger house where the owner of the mill lived. We will now turn to go down the hill and sharp left down Lombard Street, passing the village hall on the left. This is the village hall. It dates from around 1950, when the previous building was damaged by a bomb during the war. Lombard Street peters out into an unmade public road known as Pit Lane. We will continue down it until we reach the pits. We are now at the plaster pits. There are several plaster pits. You can see 3 from the road. This is one of those. It is interesting to think of how little more than 100 years ago this was the principal road to one of the largest gypsum mines and plaster manufacturers in the country. According to the Nottinghamshire volume of the Victoria History of the County of England, the gypsum at Austin was the finest in the kingdom, and according to it, it has been estimated that between 1868 and 1871, Austin produced about 8% of the nation's gypsum products. A photograph of the manufactory also survives. Other than the foundation, little remains of the manufactory and the railway sidings. Access to the underground mine was through adits, and several of these can be seen in the woods. We now need to return to the village and turn left down the road to Chapel Street. This track, known as the Row, provides an insight into what ordinary people's houses looked like in 1800. Around that time, there was an initiative to build new houses for peasants on the outskirts of villages on common land. It was called the Row as it comprised a long row of 16 one-up and one-down houses. 45 people lived here in 1880. Little remains of these now, other than Little Gables and Vale Cottage. Next to these, on Lombard Street, another row of houses was built, but they have been so substantially rebuilt and extended as to bear no recognition to their original form. It should not be thought that even Little Gables fully resembles what it was like originally. It was 4 small, minute by today's standards, one-up, one-down thatched cottages. It was renovated in the late 1950s by the local Conservative MP who lived there. Its claim to fame is that Enoch Powell, a close friend of Holland the MP, sheltered there from the press for 2 weeks after his famous Rivers of Blood speech in 1968. At the bottom of Chapel Street, opposite what was the chapel, is an intriguing earthwork feature. As this field has never been ploughed, it is possible to see that the land is levelled, and around it there are clearly banks and some pathways. This probably would have been a water meadow to produce the earliest hay. On Chapel Street, somewhere behind the council houses, is the site of a pinfold or pound, which is a high walled and lockable structure which holds stray animals until they were claimed by their owners. It was demolished in the 1950s. The left-hand side, walking back into the village, you will see in the distance the site of what would have been the village well. It was written into the deeds of this land that villagers had a right of passage across it to collect drinking water. I remember an old lady who used to talk of carrying water from it, that is before we had piped water, using the traditional means, a yoke. On the right-hand side of the road, walking back into the village, is a wood in which there are 2 fish ponds used for the hall. The field behind the wood is known as the park. This may have ancient origins, as the shape of the wood where it adjoins the park is very similar to those surrounding medieval parks kept for the use of the king and his officers. Just before the green, opposite the vicarage and the hall, is a small wood known as the plantation. The land here is lower as the result of clay being dug out to make bricks. It was usual for a village, if it had clay, to make its own bricks. The adjoining field was called Brickyard Close. So, you have now seen the village's main historical sites. If you visited them all, you've walked just over 3 miles. This is just a brief history of the village. If you're interested in more, read my book, Alston, A Nottinghamshire Village Through the Centuries, by me, Paul Barnes, and published by Toucan Books. There are 3 other videos and guides available soon: the agricultural history of Alston, gypsum and alabaster mining in Alston, and St Mary's Church, Alston.